All right, here we are. At this point, Devashish Banerjee was supposed to present. He unfortunately had a family emergency, so he can't be with here today. Instead, I had to jump in, and with about 15 minutes of lead time, I pieced together this presentation. So I've got that going against me, plus I think I'm now the only thing between you and your lunch. So I'll try to be as brief and as concise as possible. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, very good. So what I want to talk about now is artificial intelligence, its limitations, and how Bayesian networks can help overcome some of these limitations. Now, lots of people are talking about artificial intelligence these days. There are lots of magazine headlines, newspaper headlines. Even Lionel was pictured. Why does this not go? Why does the laser pointer? The laser pointer doesn't seem to work here. Even Lionel was featured on the cover of The Economist. So it's really a very important topic, and a lot of people have high hopes as to what artificial intelligence may do to us or for us. Here's a quote from Stuart Russell, a well-known artificial intelligence researcher at UC Berkeley. And I'm paraphrasing him. He's saying that artificial intelligence may cure diseases, prevent environmental catastrophes, eliminate poverty. So I hope he's right. This is really exciting. On the other hand, there are some famous people like the astrophysicist Stephen Hawking, certainly a very smart man, who says, and I quote him verbatim, "The development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race." How's that for a motivating statement? Or, of course, Elon Musk is always very bold in his statements. He said, if you're not, and he just tweeted this a little over a month ago, if you're not concerned about AI safety, you should be. Vastly more risk than North Korea. Okay, I'm not going to enter into this debate. Rather, what I want to do is leave behind all the hype there is about big data, artificial intelligence, data mining, and so on. So I think there are so many bold promises out there, and a lot of them contain a lot of hype, a lot of exaggerations in many ways. Rather, I want to focus on something where we may have a major fundamental limitation in artificial intelligence. And that was mentioned not too long ago in an article by Wired magazine, in which they were talking about how our machines have acquired knowledge that we will never understand. They are talking about how machine learning, artificial intelligence, algorithms, models produce analytic models that are essentially inaccessible to us, inaccessible to our understanding. Hence, they speak of alien knowledge. So, but I don't want to dwell on that limitation. Rather, I want to talk about how we can perhaps overcome that limitation. I don't want to look at artificial intelligence as a black box. Rather, I want to think about artificial intelligence in a way that it integrates with our own human reasoning. So, hence I've chosen the metaphor of an abacus, because clearly it helps us to keep numbers and manage numbers and do arithmetic that we perhaps couldn't do in our heads, but very clearly we know what is going on. We know what is happening. That process is transparent. And that's how I'd like to work with artificial intelligence. Now, to put that into context and see how artificial intelligence and later on Bayesian networks tie together, I want to start off with a map of analytic modeling. That sounds like a very ambitious task, and this will be a very, very simplified approach. Bear in mind, all models are wrong, some are useful. So bear this in mind as I'm proposing this map of analytic modeling. I want to start with a paper by Galid Shmueli. She is an Israeli researcher who is now teaching and researching in Taiwan. Very nice lady. I met her just last year in Nashville. She wrote a paper titled "To Explain or to Predict," in which she points out very, very strongly that we must distinguish our purposes of models. We need to keep apart and segregate whether we're building a predictive model or an explanatory model. This is particularly important because nowadays it is so easy to build predictive models. All of us can download any piece of software and very quickly build good, reliable predictive models. The problem is any such good model cannot be automatically used as an explanatory model. So I want to expand on her thought and extend it further and propose an x-axis that reflects model purpose. On the left, you see association correlation, which includes description and prediction. And then on the right-hand side, at the right end of the spectrum, we have causation, including causal explanation, causal simulation, attribution, and causal optimization. So this will be our x-axis of our model of analytic modeling. Secondly, I'm proposing a y-axis for the model source. Now, historically, most models have been developed from theory. We may have hypothesized about a problem domain, encoded a functional form, collected data to estimate parameters, etc. Nowadays, of course, we have so much data, we have fast computers, clever algorithms, we can build models entirely just from data. And there are some folks out there who think, with all the data that we have, with the powerful machines, with the powerful computers, with powerful machine learning, perhaps we don't need theory any longer. Perhaps if we just have enough of the data, that will speak for itself. Well, that is a major, major fallacy. Let me tell you why. But first, let me put together the x-axis of model purpose and the y-axis of model source. And let me place machine learning into this space. Actually, the screen snap works very nicely because it divides my map here into 4 quadrants. And I would argue that machine learning belongs up here in the upper left-hand corner. Machine learning, principally driven by data. But there is a very important limitation, and that is machine learned models, for the most part, cannot extend beyond this vertical divider here. Most of the things, the model purposes on the right-hand side, are off limits to machine learned models. Why? Well, because machine learned models are often of this type. They're very often black boxes, and I'm generalizing here very, very broadly. For instance, in particular, think about neural networks. Networks or models generated through deep learning, they have a structure something like this. Even though we can technically look at the structure and read out the values and weights and so on, it is virtually impossible to extract meaning from it. So we have algorithms that can distinguish images of cats and dogs very well, very reliably, but it would be impossible to extract, well, what makes a cat look like a cat? So, well, that's perhaps not so much a problem, but why does this really matter for us? Well, the problem is that most of the research question, most of science is about why, how, what to do, who's responsible. We are on the right-hand side. We need to know how something works. So now the question is, well, how can we even use machine learning in this context? Is this any use for the researcher, for the scientist? Well, yes, there is a way to connect the two, and that is we can augment machine learned models with our own human domain knowledge. We can add theory. So you will inevitably ask, well, how is this possible? How can I take a neural network and what I have in my head? Well, I think you already know the answer. The answer is why we're here. Bayesian networks allow us to cover this entire spectrum very, very nicely because we can machine learn Bayesian networks from data. We can directly encode our knowledge, our theoretical knowledge into them, and then use them across the entire spectrum of this map. So let me share with you one example. Actually, I have a long 4-hour presentation that covers every single one of these examples. I just want to focus on example 4. And that is because there we have to bring everything together, machine learned knowledge and human domain knowledge. Let me start on reiterating this very well-known statement: correlation does not equal causation. You all know it. You've probably said it many times. You've probably also ignored it on numerous occasions. But what is true about, or what is important to add, is that statement applies to observational data. Yeah? Because if we have experimental data, then correlation equals causation. So that's what we need to keep distinct. But that distinction, unfortunately, is often entirely ambiguous in the way we traditionally present functions, regressions, for instance, or any functional form. The equality sign is ambiguous because it could really mean two things. It could mean that we determine y as a function of seeing x, given that I see, performing observational inference, or it could alternatively mean we want to determine y as a function of doing x, given that I do. Now, this is the notation that Judea Pearl has proposed, and he goes into quite a bit of detail on the background of this in his fairly recent little book, Causal Inference in Statistics. I really like his book because he quotes Lionel and my book in his book. So this is about as much academic credit I could ever wish to have from Judea Pearl. So let me play a little game with you in order to really bring home that topic, to really emphasize this. This game is about showing you pictures of houses, different single-family homes, and then you get to pick which one you like, and then you will win the one you select. Yeah? So I'll show you pictures of houses, but the trick is I will not show you pictures like the ones here. Rather, I'll show you a picture that only shows a portion of the house, more specifically, just pictures of the garages. Yeah? So we now have picture A, which shows a home with a 1-car garage, picture B, a home with a 3-car garage, and then finally picture C, a home with a 2-car garage. I should say all these homes are in the same neighborhood, same construction company, all very good quality. And now my question to you is, this is not a trick question, my question to you is, which home would you like to have?
The A1.
A?
Yes, because I live in Paris, I don't need the car.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's an outlier. Okay, let an American answer this.
Oh, sorry.
Aaron. B. Okay, B. Aaron, what is your reasoning behind selecting B?
3-car garage, must be bigger.
Must be bigger. Anybody else, do you agree with logic? So I think what Aaron has done, he has built a predictive model in his head, inferring from this picture, 3-car garage means there's a bigger house, bigger value. You'll get it and if you get it for free, of course you want to have the biggest home. Well, in fact, we have a date. We'll get the house later. We'll talk about the details. We actually have a data set from a city in the U.S. The city is Ames, Iowa. And there we have several thousand home price transactions. including all the attributes of the homes, like everything, floor space, number of bathrooms, bedrooms, roof material, type of fence, like a couple of hundred attributes, among them the number of garage spaces. So we did a simple regression, regressed price on the number of garages, and came up with this regression line and got a unit effect of $71,000. So Aaron's intuition is nicely supported with data. So with that knowledge, we have a homeowner who says, this is absolutely fantastic. You know, if there's a unit effect of $71,000, I will add 2 garages to my existing home and raise its value by $142,000. So he calls up the company that sells garages. They come with a big truck, put down the garages. Here's our homeowner, and he thinks he has just added $142,000 in value. Is he correct?
I suspect that not.
No?
No.
So, everybody in agreement? No, he's not right. So we're all in agreement. Why is he not correct? Why is he not correct?
Because we are considering only one point, one aspect.
Because it's not an equivalence.
Yeah.
It's not an equivalence between the
There's
size.
one key word I'm looking for.
It's not causal.
It's not causal. The word I'm looking for is intervention. This is an intervention. He's not observing something about his neighborhood. He's coming in, and the big truck is a hint. If something requires a big truck, it's probably an intervention. So he is performing an intervention. That's why he is not correct. So the question now becomes, well, how can we resolve that? It would certainly be possible to improve on our statistical model. Our initial model was just regressing price and the number of garages, but we could certainly have many, many more variables. We have plenty of them, plenty of observations. So all of us could very easily build a better predictive model. The question now is, what is the causal model? What would that look like? Any suggestions?
What's the size of the area of the house now?
No, I'm afraid not. The answer is, we have no idea. We couldn't possibly know. We cannot know. This is a complete dead end.
But if you are a seller of a house, they say you have in this neighborhood, you have this meter, so the price is this one. I have this experience.
Yeah, totally. I'm just saying, the only way we could properly answer this is by running experiments. Yeah? So here with this example, we're actually stuck. The only thing we need to walk away from here is what we cannot do. We cannot take a predictive model and use it as a causal model. And that is the big problem in science, because nowadays it is so easy to build great predictive models that the temptation is big, or temptation is great to misuse them as causal models. So this example we cannot resolve. Let me example that we might be able to resolve. I'm now switching domains, going into advertising, and since my background is in the auto industry, I always return to something that involves cars sooner or later. So the background here is that they're Lexuses. There's a Lexus brand here in France, right? Yeah. So a big brand in the US. And are you familiar with the Super Bowl? That's America's biggest sports event. Really, really huge thing. Everybody's watching except me. So Lexus decided to launch their new entry-level luxury SUV at the Super Bowl. And here I'll just show you the commercial. Let's see whether that works. Where's my mouse pointer? Here. Not sure whether that links to the audio.
Go beyond utility. Introducing the first ever NX Turbo and Hybrid from Lexus. heard.
Okay, so this was the commercial. Well, where did my PowerPoint go? So, and as you can imagine, it cost millions to produce this commercial, plus millions more to air it. So Lexus obviously wants to know, well, are we raising our profile? Are we selling more cars as a result? So they hire a market research firm to speak to lots of vehicle shoppers in this particular segment to see what they think about this commercial. So they did a survey in which they asked 1,000 car shoppers about whether they've seen the ad, whether they've purchased a Lexus, what their gender is, and whether they have done a test drive. So that's the data set they collect. And of course, that's non-experimental data. That's purely observational data, collected after the fact. So they complete the survey, get all the data back, and compile it. And of course, the first thing you do is you do a nice little crosstab to see, well, what are the top line results? But as it turns out, when they run the crosstab, it looks like that those people who have seen the ad purchased Lexus at a lower rate than those who did not see the ad. So of course, you don't want to take that to the CEO who just spent $10 million or so. So what we do in market research, we slice and dice until we find a story that we like. So we'll just keep going. And so now we stratify by gender, and this is already something we like much, much better. So now when we just look at men who saw the ad purchased Lexus at a higher rate, and women who saw the ad purchased Lexus at a higher rate. Yeah? So, and of course we can use the same data and do a regression and get exactly the same percentage changes. So what do you think? Well, what's the meaningful one? Is it this one? Was this a negative ad? Or was this a good ad? Any thoughts?
This is the second one.
Second one? I mean, how is this possible anyway? That if you look at the group as a whole, it's negative. If you separate it by male and female.
Because I suspect that the population of male or female is not 50%.
It is actually. It is 50%.
I did.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts? Well, how is this even possible? Does anybody know what's going on here?
Maybe I've watched more the ad than the females.
Say it again?
More males have seen the ad than females.
Ah, okay. I think you're getting where. Well, first of all, what we have here is we have Simpson's paradox, where we have a reversal of sign. Simpson's paradox. I presume most people have heard of Simpson's paradox. So this rears its ugly head here. But we're not done yet. This is kind of a double Simpson's paradox, because now we're adding another variable. Now we're adding test drive and stratify by test drive, and now it's all negative again. Now we add all variables, test drive, gender, and exposure, and now it looks like it balances out. So we now have 4 tables, and all of this work is done by the intern. They do the work in most major companies. So we have now 4 tables, and we can equivalently do 4 regressions, and we have either no effect, negative, a little bit positive, and negative again. So what's your take? Quick show of hands. Who thinks this was a good ad? Gary, Jackie, Nick. Okay.
The reason I know is like I play on Chicago.
Okay, so who thinks this was a neutral ad? Okay.
I think so, because I change my car every 10 years, and that's it.
Oh, what's wrong with you? Okay, who thinks it was a negative ad? Okay. So we have lots of undecided people, like our intern here. But what we need to realize, all these tables, what they really represent is they are all models, that tell us given that I see, given that I see, given that I see, given that I see. Like given that I see test drive is no, given that I see gender is male, ad exposure is no, purchase rate is 30%. So, and of course, when you take all this to the CEO is reading Harvard Business Review, so he's very with it, up to speed with the latest and greatest, and so he says, let's make a data-driven decision. Yeah, yeah, here is all your data. That's everything. There is all your data. The problem is here you cannot make a data-driven decision. The problem is we're up here in our map. We have a predictive model, or actually multiple predictive models. What we need is a causal model. We want to know what happens if we do expose people to the ad. The problem now is we cannot answer this with data. And that's why I like to speak of the fallacy of data-driven decisions. When somebody tells you, take a data-driven decision, hit them over the head. Yeah? And because everybody's so fixated on it. Data will not solve this, not clever techniques, not more data, absolutely nothing. Instead, what we need is a story. We need a story that tells us how the data came into existence. So we cannot answer this on the data channel. We need to answer this on the theoretical channel. And by adding our assumptions, our thinking about how this data came into existence. But of course, whenever we use our own assumptions, they could be wrong. No? Your guess is as good as mine. So what we now want to do is think about, can we put together the assumptions to solve this riddle? So I've laid out here our 4 variables: gender, ad exposure, test drive, and purchase. And I'd like to ask you, what is the causal structure here? What do you think, how are they related? What causes what?
Ad exposure causes test drive, causes purchase.
Okay. Does everybody agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Alto?
Gender causes ad exposure.
Gender, what's your theory there?
Because you have maybe less females that watch the Super Bowl.
Well, I think that's a plausible theory. Everybody in agreement? Yeah. What else?
Ad exposure causes purchase, bypassing test drive.
Okay, I think that's certainly we would hope so. At least that's a potential effect. What else? Well, anything else?
Gender to purchase.
Gender to purchase, what's the theory there?
Given that type of vehicle, perhaps more families, or if it's a younger version or what have you, or
I think it's Lexus is a girly brand. That's my thinking.
spoken like a true German.
Yeah, my wife wants a Lexus, but no way. So I think we've mentioned all these arcs. This is our theory, and this is now the causal structure that we have. And of course, now we can take our data and machine learn the parameters, the conditional probability tables, and thus have a fully specified Bayesian network. Whenever I show this to the uninitiated, I usually compare what a network looks like that is purely machine learned, because we don't recover that structure unless by sheer coincidence. So here we require our human domain knowledge. So what can we do now? The question now is, how can we get to the question, the variable value of interest? What is the ad effect? How can we now take this and estimate the effect, get to the effect? Well, what I propose is we simply try it out. Now we have a model of our world with all relationships encoded, everything connected, everything holds independently. And so we basically need to take this and try it out, change something. And I like to make, again, a mechanical comparison. Think of this now like finite element analysis, where you encode all the equations for every bit and all the bits and pieces of the system under study, and then you apply pressure, and you try something. And this is exactly what we want to do here. We're saying this is the full representation of the dynamics of the world. We're also saying, you know, ethnicity doesn't play a role. We clearly make a lot of simplification. But we now need to try this out, but in a very specific way, because we want to get to causal inference. We want to figure out what happens, or we want to, the answer to estimating the add effect comes through simulating an intervention. We need to simulate on or intervene under add exposure to then see how it affects purchase. Now there are a number of ways to do that. Important here is that we are preventing this backdoor path from add exposure via gender to purchase. What we want is the direct effect of add exposure via all its causal paths to purchase. Now there are multiple ways how to do that. One, using graph surgery as Judea Pearl has proposed it, removing that arc from gender to add exposure, that clearly has a role here. And that's what we need to remove. And then we're able to simulate different values for add exposure and then see how what results as the new value. So let me, yes please, Alta.
Can you just please explain again why you don't want the link?
Yes. Let me actually show you in this model in BayesiaLab. I'll just go back here. Where's my mouse pointer? Ah, here. So here is the network. Let's now bring up all. Oops. Yeah. Oh.
Wrong screen.
Wrong screen. Okay, here we go. So let me now, here's the network with the conditional probability tables estimated, and here are the monitors for all our variables. Let's first take this network as is and replicate what we saw earlier from the tables that were estimated from data, the crosstabs. So I will simply now toggle add exposure 0 to add exposure 1. Exactly what we saw with the very, very first table. So let me set to add exposure to 0. Then we can see how purchase changes. Now you can say purchase is at 60%. Add exposure 1, purchase is at 45%. Yeah? So this is what originally troubled us. You know, given that you see the add, the purchase rate goes down. But we see something else that is happening. That is with these other variables. We can see that given that somebody sees the add, the probability of being male is much greater. So if, again, I'm toggling back and forth. Watch now the gender monitor. Now we see, at exposure 0, the proportion of females is much greater. And it so turns out that females have a higher likelihood of buying Lexus. So we have this backdoor path. Given that I see the ad, the male ratio goes down, the purchase rate goes down, and conversely. So that's what gave rise to the paradox. Yeah? And that's what we need to overcome. But now that we have the causal structure, we can overcome that. With any network, we could not have done that. With a machine learning network, it doesn't have the correct causal structure. We could not answer the question. We could answer the predictive question. So we could simulate all the tables that we saw earlier. But now we want to know what happens if we intervene on ad exposure. In BayesiaLab, that is very, very simple because we can implement that by declaring ad exposure as an intervention variable. I go into the menu, go from observation, I go to the contextual menu of the monitor, go from observation to intervention, and now look what happens when I toggle between 0 and 1. BayesiaLab automatically performs that graph surgery, and now observe the variable ad exposure, and not observe the monitor for purchase, and as I'm toggling back and forth, it turns out, given that I intervene on ad exposure, the purchase rate actually goes up. As it turns out, this was a good ad. This was actually a successful campaign. Let me return to PowerPoint here. Now, BayesiaLab allows us a number of ways to implement that. On the one hand, graph surgery. An equivalent way of doing it would be, oops, how do I get back into presentation mode? An equivalent way would also be by fixing probabilities and gender, which has the same effect of removing this backdoor path and giving us the correct causal estimate. So with our theory, we were able to solve this riddle. Now we have the answer, and as it turns out, one of these tables turned out to be correct. Because one table is the equivalent of what we have done through the graph surgery. This table that includes gender that stratifies on gender, that by including gender as a variable in the table, it in effect conditions on the variable, and there conditions only on that variable, that blocks that path, and therefore that one table actually represents the correct causal effect. With our theory, with learning the parameters from data, we can answer this question. Data alone could not have done that for us. Questions? You're all hungry. Yes, Gary.
So what was happening there in the graph surgery was that it was removing all the incoming answers.
Yes.
And then you were doing probabilities. You have to fix the probabilities on all the appearance.
No, you only have to fix the probabilities on the confounders. In this case,
Which you need to know. So the safer way is to do graph surgery. It would work it out.
no, graph surgery wouldn't work it out for you. You need to have the graph, the causal graph, upon which you can then determine either what variable you need to condition on, or you need to know what variable you intervene on. But through performing the intervention on ad exposure, BayesiaLab automatically moves through graph surgery the incoming arc. So in that sense, it's automatic. It would remove all the inbound arcs.
Yes. So actually my second question was you would fix the probability of all the appearance that are
You would need to, I'll just go back here.
because you've only got one appearance there.
Yeah.
But
So what you need to, and another way, there are many ways of how you can look at it. This falls under the whole concept of causal identification and estimation. What we want to achieve is this causal effect here. This would be a non-causal relationship. And that's what we need to prevent. And there are multiple ways how to prevent it. either by conditioning, by fixing, matching, by performing graft surgery. So these are all equivalent operations that remove this influence, that remove this spurious relationship, and then bring us the result, bring us the effect that we're actually interested in.
The model is not causal because the arrow is oriented.
Yes,
And
exactly.
this way we implement the knowledge that in fact it has to be, this one has to be cut.
Yes. So the number, for instance, what Jill was just referring to is distinguishing between causal and non-causal path is as simple as performing, following the path, performing a path analysis. A causal path is any connection between nodes, any path between cause and effect that always travels in the same direction, as opposed to a non-causal path includes traversing arcs with opposite directions. And the idea, or what's the identification criterion really is, we need to be able to block the non-causal path and keep the causal paths open. And that's, so these are the causal paths, these we need to keep open, they give us the effect. The non-causal paths, they need to be blocked. And then we have our results. Yes, Steve.
So you're doing the sales presentation to me as a person who does a lot of regressions, and I say, well, I would use my domain knowledge simply to include gender and an interaction between gender and ad exposure in my regression equation, and that would effectively do the same thing without your fancy software.
Exactly. You say, by all means, yes, exactly. You treat gender as as a confounder. You need to condition on confounders, control for confounders, including it in your regression. That does exactly the same thing. And in a simple case like this, it's almost intuitive. But now imagine you extend this to a dozen or more variables. Then it is no longer immediately obvious what is a confounder and what should not be treated as a confounder. So here in this example, when I share this with people, a lot of people think, well, let's just condition on gender and test drive. Let's just condition on everything. Let's condition on all the covariants. But here, one of the insights is we must not condition on test drive. That is on the causal path. That must remain open. So that the temptation of a lot of researchers is just to condition on everything that's there very often backfires and biases their results.
Or alternatively, doing some stepwise procedure and simply looking for the strongest relationship when you might be conditioning on something you should be conditioning on.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, lunch looks very tempting. If this topic interests you further, there's how this is part of my regular spiel, my regular presentations. Feel free to reach out with further questions. Thank you so much for your interest. Lunch is served.